Hi guys, how's everybody this evening? Well, strap yourselves in, because this is a bit of a wild ride. So hang in there, because it gets complicated. I'll try and do my best to make it as simple as possible. William Sharp was born in Paisley, Scotland in 1855 and died in Sicily in 1905. He was a highly complex man, brilliant, charming, funny, hyperactive, but rather vulnerable. Within just 50 years of life, William wore 4 different hats: that of critic and biographer, writer and poet, world traveler, and Golden Dawn magician and mystic. His extensive letters and memoirs reveal a wide circle of high-profile friends and influences. But Sharp was also a man wrapped in many secrets. The most intense of these was that he was not only William Sharp, but he was also the fiery feminist, poet, and Celtic revival writer Fiona MacLeod. In the last 13 years of his life, Sharp maintained 2 writing careers, one as himself, the other as a woman whose true identity he kept secret from all but a few close friends. This was much more than a pen name. Sharp and his alter ego, who claimed to be of fairy lineage, negotiated separate publishing contracts, corresponded with their readers and friends, worked with editors, and published novels, poetry, and criticism, all in 2 different styles under 2 different names. Most of what we know about Sharp we know through his widow Elizabeth. Elizabeth's book, William Sharp, brackets Fiona MacLeod, a memoir, details his public life, writings, and travels. But it tells us almost nothing about his magical interest and pursuits. Nor does it tell us about his passionate relationship with another woman, one which caused the phenomenon of Fiona MacLeod to occur. William was the eldest of 8 children in an upper-class household headed by David Galbraith Sharp, a textile merchant. The family holidayed every summer in the western Scottish Isles. They were frequently joined by William's aunt and her children. One of these cousins, Elizabeth, became William's lifelong best friend. Despite suffering from asthma and a weak heart, William loved fishing and sailing and going for long walks over the hills. This love of outdoor pursuits remained with him throughout his life, and in spite of increasingly poor health. Now, William was always different. As a child, he listened avidly to his old Highland nurse Barbara, who regaled him with tales of the Viking and Celtic heroes. She also taught him Gaelic. He worshipped trees and offered tributes to the local sea god. He also had an encounter with a fairy woman beside a loch. Years later, he described this. She stooped and lifted blueness out of the flowers, and I thought she threw it over me. When I was found lying among the hyacinths, dazed, I asked eagerly after the lady in white, with hair all shiny gold like buttercups. But I was laughed at, or at least, when I passionately persisted, was told I was sun-dazed and had been dreaming. Sharp biographer Stephen Blamires believes William had received a baptism into the world of fairy. William learned to keep his secret world to himself from all except his cousin Elizabeth. She seemed to understand William's link with the green world, or what some might call the fairy realm. So, did William really have a brush with a fairy? Almost certainly, his nurse Barbara would have thought so, and she would have been worried. See, nowadays we think of fairies as being little Tinkerbells. But many Victorians, including some famous and highly respected people, viewed fairies quite differently. They saw them as elusive, powerful, dangerous, and very real. In particular, the Irish and the people of the Scottish Highlands and Islands took great care not to provoke the Sheed, particularly where children were concerned. All had heard stories of the changeling, a fairy child switched for a human child. And in Ireland, the fear of young boys snatched away to the twilight world was so great that boys were routinely dressed as girls, so the fairy would have no interest in taking them. At age 16, William was struck down by typhoid fever, which further damaged his already weak heart. He was sent to recuperate in the Scottish Islands. There he forged a strong friendship with Fiona MacLeod, an old fisherman he had met on earlier holidays. Seamus mentored William further in Celtic ways, and may have influenced the creation of Fiona MacLeod years later. William had a great need to be free, both physically and mentally. From a young age, he read literature and philosophy, mysticism and magic, mythology and folklore, all of which he retained with a near-perfect memory. Then in the summer of 1873, the 18-year-old William took to the heather, joining a troop of European Romany gypsies wandering the highlands. They made him their son brother, and for 3 months he wandered the countryside with his adoptive family, learning gypsy lore, traditions, and language. Elizabeth later wrote of the truant having to be recaptured, but only after considerable trouble. After this, he was apprenticed to a lawyer's office in the city. He hated it. At 24, William, a budding poet and writer, gained an introduction to Dante Gabriel Rossetti, leader of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. The introduction was through Noel Paton, the artist, poet, and Celtic revivals. Tall and blonde, with considerable pluck, presence, and impeccable upper-class manners, doors opened easily for William. Through Rossetti, William was admitted into the inner circle of the London Bohemian artist community. When Rossetti died in 1882, William was devastated. But when he was asked to write a book about his friend, he accepted the offer immediately. His Life of Rossetti was well received, and further biographies followed. In 1884, after a 9-year engagement, Sharp finally married his cousin Elizabeth, who was also a writer. The marriage would prove childless. By early 1890, William was writing biographies. His star was on the rise. Additionally, for some time, William had been conducting psychic and occult experiments. These flourished too, with friends William Butler Yeats, the mystic George Russell, Ernest Rhys, and Arthur Symons often joining him. His life was now perfect, so of course William became restless. They decided to move to Rome. Upon their arrival in Italy, William and Edith fell in with a British expat crowd. This included one Edith Wingate Rinder. She was sweet-natured and very beautiful. Edith translated and published Belgian literature and the folk tales of Brittany. Edith was in Italy without her husband Frank, accompanied instead by Frank's cousin Mona Caird. Mona was Elizabeth Sharp's best friend. On January 3rd, 1891, Edith and William, just the two of them, took a day trip to the legendary Lake Nemi, thought to be a gateway to hidden realms. There, Edith decided to swim naked in full view of William, and he fell head over heels in love. William wrote a book of prose, Suspiria di Roma, or Sighs of Rome, almost on the spot. It has been compared with Walt Whitman. William later described to a friend what happened that day, but substituted the name Fiona for Edith. He said this was the first time he had met Fiona MacLeod, who was on the banks of Lake Nemi, when she was enjoying a sunbath in what she deemed was a virgin solitude after swimming in the lake. That moment began my spiritual regeneration. I was a new man, a mystic, where before I had been only a mechanic in art. Carried away by my passion, my pen felt as if I dipped in fire, and when I sat down to write prose, a spirit hand would seize my pen and guide it to inspired verse. Did they have sex? We don't know. But Stephen Blamires claims that what William is describing is nothing less than the conception of Fiona MacLeod. their stay in Italy, the Sharps moved to Fennis Croft, a cottage in Rudgwick, West Sussex. There Sharp, a powerful psychic, continued to delve into magical experiments, which began to manifest within his behavior as well as the atmosphere of the cottage. A young Gothic horror novelist named Murray Gilchrist had stayed there. Later he wrote, "There is something of awe, of terror about the house." In 1892, Sharp edited The Pagan Review, one of the chief texts of the new paganism of the 1890s. Every article was written by Sharp under a variety of pseudonyms. Fiona MacLeod seems to have emerged from within William's consciousness at Fennis Croft during the summer of 1893. This is when she, quite separate from William, began to write poetry and novels and correspond with Sharp's friends. But exactly who or what was Fiona MacLeod? Was she a feminine aspect of William's personality? Was she the result of a multiple personality disorder? Or was she some sort of entity channeled by Sharp during his psychic experiments? Fiona herself claimed to be of fairy origin, stating, "I was born more than 1,000 years ago in the remote region of Gaeldom known as the Hills of Dream." Her writing was infused with what she claimed was authentic fairy lore. Much of what she wrote, she claimed, was from a fairy cultural perspective. William constructed an elaborate series of deceptions to maintain his secret. He told friends Fiona was his cousin. He arranged for his sister Mary in Edinburgh to write Fiona's letters in a feminine hand, as well as providing a separate home address for Fiona. He even persuaded Edith to occasionally meet his friends, pretending to be Fiona. Sharp told everyone his cousin was born in the Southern Hebrides. She was married to a rich, secretive laird who was happy for her to write and travel freely. Sharp said he helped Fiona publish her writings, but he respected her privacy and rarely knew where she was. In the summer of 1894, after a stay in Iona, Fiona MacLeod's first novel, Foray, A Romance of the Isles, appeared. It began with a 5-page dedication to Edith Wingate Rinder. Both Elizabeth and Edith's husband Frank seemed to accept William and Edith's relationship, as well as the phenomenon of Fiona MacLeod, and they began to notice a pattern emerging. When William was alone with Elizabeth, he could write as Sharp, but found it difficult to write as Fiona MacLeod. When he was alone with Edith, the reverse was true. Fiona came through full force, with William somewhere in the background. All three seemed to recognize, understand, and even encourage this phenomenon. Edith and Elizabeth were good friends, as were William and Frank. Everyone seemed comfortable with the situation. Had it not been for this mutual understanding and tolerance, which was quite extraordinary, Fiona may never have been able to come through and achieve all that she did. Fiona's frequent appearances resulted in William's near total physical and mental breakdown. At times, his behavior verged on madness, when he sincerely believed Fiona was a separate physical woman he could travel and converse with. At other times, he could not distinguish between Fiona and Edith, or even between Fiona and himself. On his birthday, 2 cards were exchanged. One was from William to Fiona. The other was from Fiona to William. He also sometimes referred to himself as Wilfion, combining the 2 names into one. In addition to this mental distress, his heart began to fail, resulting in frequent attacks of angina and fainting fits. Though William was dangerously ill, Fiona forced him to stick to a punishing schedule. For hours on end, Fiona would take over, writing her own novels and poetry, and maintaining an extensive and completely separate correspondence. In just 2 years, Fiona wrote 6 books of poetry, novels, and mythological tales. The Sin Eater, in particular, was well received by both public and critics. Meanwhile, William was struggling to maintain his own profile, producing just 2 books in that same period. This is called Riders of the Sheed, and it's by John Duncan, and quite a lot of the symbolism was given to John Duncan by William Butler Yeats. William and Elizabeth moved to a house called West Ham in London, where they lived for 3 years. During this time, William became deeply involved in the Celtic revival movement at the end of the century, an extension of the symbolist movement. Irish, Welsh, and Scottish men and women were seeking to embed powerful imagery within their poetry, novels, plays, and art, which they hoped would stir deep ancestral memories within Celtic peoples. The idea was that once these passions were sufficiently aroused, Celts would unite and assert themselves spiritually, culturally, and politically. This is William Butler Yeats. This is his muse, Maud Gonne, and that's George Russell. A number of these men and women, including Sharp, were also members of the esoteric order, the Golden Dawn, whose most prominent member was the poet William Butler Yeats. With a group of Golden Dawn adepts and others, Yeats had been attempting to revive the ancient Celtic mysteries and create a new Celtic rite. Yeats in particular wanted to use this magic to free the Irish. The magicians called their group the Celtic Mystical Order, and Sharp was a member. From the late 1890s until 1901, Sharp, George Russell, Yeats's muse Maud Gonne, and Golden Dawn adepts gathered. They smoked hashish, took mescaline, and carried out various magical rites and ceremonies. But things got complicated. Unaware of Sharp's secret, Yeats embarked on a vigorous exchange of letters with Fiona. He was keen to recruit the fiery female Celt into the movement. Fiona jumped at the chance. William was horrified. Sharp had initially told his friend that Fiona was his cousin. He now decided to tell Yeats the Fiona name was a pseudonym, but not his own. He told Yeats it was to conceal the identity of a woman he was in love with. He confessed that he had been collaborating with this woman on the Fiona MacLeod writings. Both Yeats and Russell began to guess at what was really going on, and from then on, William was referred to as Mick Sharp. By 1905, the New York Times was calling MacLeod's identity the most interesting literary mystery in the United Kingdom for the past 10 years. People wanted to know more about the author of these mystical Celtic tales. Where did she live? What did she look like? Would she be available for interviews? Photographs? The deception took on almost farcical dimensions. In giving his sister Mary's address as Fiona's, Fiona MacLeod fans and members of the press began to turn up on the doorstep, demanding to see her. Would-be suitors became an embarrassing problem. One, a Scottish clergyman, fell passionately in love with Fiona after reading her books. William received a letter from the man's mother saying she feared he would take his life in his mad love for Fiona. Sharp told a friend that this was the second proposal of marriage Fiona had received. In December 1905, William knew he was dying and spent his last days in Sicily with Elizabeth and his good friend the Duke of Bronte. He died during a wild storm on the 12th of December. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with the Duke and Elizabeth by his side, William suddenly leaned forward, eyes sparkling brightly, and exclaimed, "Oh, the beautiful green life, again!" He sank back into his wife's arms and quietly said, "Ah, all is well." With those final words, William Sharp and Fiona MacLeod passed into the dominion of dreams. Fiona is said to have died when William died. If so, she had packed an entire productive life into just 13 years. As per William's instructions, 2 days after he died, Edith sent a telegram announcing his death, which concluded by saying, "Mr. Sharp was the author of all works which might have appeared under the name of Fiona MacLeod." The revelation was regarded as an absolute scandal, and a storm ensued. Many, especially those who received Fiona's letters or who had met Edith masquerading as Fiona, simply refused to believe the truth. Women were angry they had been corresponding with a man, whilst men, especially would-be suitors, were embarrassed by the deception. Needless to say, Sales of both William and Fiona's works plummeted, and both sank without a trace. Or did they? 3 weeks after William's death, Yeats, deeply affected by his friend's passing, wrote to Elizabeth. He was always very near to the world where he now is, and often seemed to me to deliver its messages. One who was so often, as it seemed, out of the body, cannot have undergone any recognizable change or gone very far away. He was right. Soon after William died, Elizabeth began attending seances and believed that she was in communication with his spirit. Then in 1969, an American named Conrad Hopkins was attending a seance, and the communicator spelled out Fiona MacLeod. No one else had heard of this name except Conrad. He asked, "Are you William Sharp?" And the spirit answered, "Yes." The spirit remained in contact with Conrad for several years. Then in 1979, Conrad read about a famous British medium named Margot Williams, who had been receiving messages from a spirit called William Sharp, whom she had previously never heard of. Conrad read this and immediately got in touch. They began to work together. William communicated through Margot frequently and dictated many new poems, published in a book called The Wilfion Scripts. During all these communications, William's spirit was at pains to make it clear that Fiona is no more. Now here's the thing. I too had never heard of William Sharp or Fiona MacLeod until I was working at Camilla's bookshop. It's about 5 doors down that way. Any of you know it? It's amazing. And Aladdin's Cave. It's an incredible place. There, it looks like that. 3 floors. About 500,000 books, nobody knows. Anyway, I worked there about 2 hours a week. And I was occasionally go to the mythology section and put books in order. That's my main job. And I kept running into this book over and over and over again. I'd put it in place, and then it would get pulled out of place. And I'd put it in place again, and then it would get pulled out of place. And this kept happening. And then a friend of mine, Mary, in London, she said, "I'm looking for a good book on Celtic lore." Well, I didn't know what book she wanted, so I photographed the whole shelf, and I showed it to her. And she said, "Oh, that one looks interesting. I have that one." So I bought it. Now, it gets stranger. So there I am. I'm downstairs in the basement. I'm working in the history section. A book falls on my head and lands on my head. Fiona MacLeod, washer in the Ford, hit me, bonk, right on the head. So then I'm working in the poetry section. Okay, yes, poetry, right section. Now, as you can probably see, book avalanches are fairly common in Camilla's. And a book avalanche, the big one, occurred. And a whole pile of books fell forward, exposing books that had probably been buried there for years. And as the pile came and the avalanche came towards me, the last book in the avalanche landed on my toe, and it was this one, by William Sharp. So there I am. I come into work another time. I open the front door, and there's a sort of main drag past the till. So I'm coming through there, and right smack in the middle of the main corridor, completely on the wrong floor, is a book. And it's a William Butler Yeats book, a book of his poetry. Now, I was just beginning to realize at the time the link between Yeats and Sharp. This actually wound up leading me to an extensive study of Yeats. I've been about 2.5 years into Yeats's occult life. Anyway, I picked up this book, and I thought, that's strange. It's on a completely different floor. I went into the kitchen, and Camilla's is, well, it's not like any other place. There was a washing machine that's in the kitchen, and it hadn't been used for a long time, I think, because there was books inside the washing machine, as well as on top. But this time when I went in, the washing machine was working, and it had a load of laundry in it. And on top of the washing machine were 2 very large boxes of fairy detergent. And behind the washing machine is a window, which is completely encrusted in dirt. And I've never seen any sun come through that window at all. Well, there was sun coming through, and it was kind of refracting through the dirt across the boxes of fairy soap. And that's my Yeats book there. So, they say that Fiona died when William did. I'm not so sure about that. How about you? Thank you very much.
fantastic, thank you very much. I had no clue, and I was going to ask you actually, Zephyr, first of all, so this is just a chance for a few questions if people want, but one of the questions I had for you was why and where did the fascination of Sharp and MacLeod come from? But you have just answered that. And, do you know Camilla's bookshop? I guess most people know East Wales pretty know it.
Yeah, it's an amazing bookshop. Yeah. It's like one of the last ones left. They're all shedding, so use it or lose it. It's there, and you will go in there looking for a book. You will never find that book, ever. But you will find 6 books that you never in your life even thought you needed or wanted, and there they are.
That's a brilliant talk and a great story. I had no clue about Sharp or MacLeod. Kind of reminiscent a little bit in parts of the talk we had back in January by Richard about Alistair Crowley. I mean, it's similar sort of fact. Well, it was a different time period because Crowley was a little later.
No. But Yeats and Crowley were around very much at that time. Sharp used to go to the pub with Yeats and Sharp. Sharp, Yeats, and Crowley all used to go to the pub after Golden Dawn meetings. And what's interesting about Crowley and Yeats is that they were 2 exact opposites. They were completely, totally opposite. So one was a big braggart, and he lied all the time, and he was really into kind of tearing everything down, and knocking everything down, destroying it so it would be rebuilt. Yeats was a builder. He worked by consensus. He was quite modest. He adopted a kind of hidden in plain sight thing about his occult studies. It was there. He never lied, but he didn't make a big deal of it, and people kind of seemed to overlook it somehow with Yeats. They called him the man who dreamed modern Ireland into existence. And he said years before, when he was a young man, that he was going to embed magic symbols into his work, which would work their way through the psyche of the British people, and he would use this to free Ireland. And some people say that's exactly what he did, because he was a builder.
Great. Does anybody have any, sorry, I've stolen a couple of questions right at the start. Anybody have any questions for Zephyr just before anybody have anything to dig into and if not, then we'll stop. But I thought that was a fascinating and kind of really, yeah, sorry, was there, no questions? Yeah?
I was going to ask about Dion Fortune, was she part of the Golden Dawn, was that?
Dion Fortune was a much later version of the Golden Dawn. So the original Golden Dawn collapsed in 1901 because of Crowley, actually. But after that, it splintered off into different groups. And Dion Fortune joined a group much later, about 20 years later, that was being run by one of the founders of the Golden Dawn's wife, Mina Matthews. And she was in that group for a short while, and then Mina Matthews, I think, got jealous and kind of pushed her out. And Fortune went on to do her own stuff.
Any other questions? Any other Sharp or MacLeod? Yeah.
Is there any evidence that it might have been Edith writing these and publishing them on? Because I think there's other parallels of women not being published in the past and having to take on male pseudonyms. Is there any case that it might have been Edith writing them, or?
Edith didn't write under a pseudonym. She wrote plenty of her stuff. But what was interesting was that Sharp was surrounded by feminists, many who became leading suffragettes. So his wife became a really militant suffragette in later times, and her best friend Mona Caird was one of the suffragette leaders. And Edith was also a feminist.
Any other final questions before we take a well-earned break? In which case, can we thank Zephyr again?